Hello, I'm Jerry Hayes, Development Director at the Lenawee County Mission. I'm filling in this week for Pastor Stephen Palmer, who's taking a few days off. Over the past few weeks, Pastor Steve has been talking about our spiritual role when it comes to engaging the homeless. I'll do my best to continue that theme this week. You know, whenever we consider the homeless, the hungry, even the addicted, what we're really dealing with is the question, who is on the inside and who is on the outside? Now, you may be able to hear some traffic behind me, or if you're watching the video, may be able to see some cars going by. That's because I chose to come outside for this broadcast. At first glance, we probably think of the question from a physical sense. Who is literally inside and outside, of shelter and of home? But it's also true that it raises the question of who is inside and outside of culture. Who is inside and outside of our community? Who are the ones who have access to resources and those who have not? Those who have influence and those who have not. Sadly, it is also the case that often the answers to those questions are the same people. Those who are outside with no shelter, who are hungry, are also those who are excluded from our community. Those without resources and influence are on the outside of culture looking in. You know, the gospel finds itself intimately concerned with the same questions. Who is outside and who is inside? And how to bring up close those who are far away. For at the very heart of the gospel itself is the grace and hospitality, which is why we Christians must be most concerned with the fact that people in our community are homeless, hungry, even addicted. These are the very concerns of the Lenawee County Mission. In Matthew 25, for instance, it seems to indicate that there is judgment solely for those who are on the inside, those who have access to shelter and clothes and food and water. And the evidence that will be weighed to make the judgment is not their devotion to being in church every week. It's not their denominational affiliation or their worship preferences, but it is the very evidence of how these people on the inside treated those who were on the outside. From Matthew 25 we read, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you invited me in.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those at his left hand, 'You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they will also answer, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you?' Then he will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' and these will go away into the eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. How we use the privilege of our insider status, our resources, our dreams and aspirations, our shelter, how we use those things to serve those who are outside with none of these things should be the all-consuming question of the church. Incidentally, I hope you notice that the parable does not indicate any judgment for those who are on the outside, and I bring that up as just kind of an incidental point for you to ponder. In Hebrews 13, we have another version of the gospel we proclaim. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them, who are being tortured as though you yourselves were being tortured. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore Jesus also suffered outside the city gate in order to sanctify the people by his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp and bear the abuse he endured. For here we have no lasting city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. In this passage is where we find Jesus, the one who is accustomed to the outside, whose life and death and his total being on earth were shaped by his outsider status, rejected and despised and exiled from his hometown, no place to lay his head. Ultimately, he is crucified outside the civilized place, outside the place where the so-called respectable people gathered. And in turn, he calls you and me to go outside. He calls us to leave our places of privilege, power, and influence, to take the risk of stepping outside the bounds of respectability, and there to risk something, and to find that Jesus is already there in the midst of it. Among the outcast and the addicted, with the homeless person and the hungry. Lenawee County Mission is a community which chooses to be outside for the sake of those who are outside. When you join with us, you also have a choice to step outside for the sake of those who are outside.